I'm Bhekinkosi Moyo. I currently direct the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment at Wits Business School. I'm also a faculty member. I spent a number of years working with nonprofits across the African continent. And in those years, it became very clear to me that a number of our institutions were not configured for the future. A number of our institutions would be found wanting if a pandemic like COVID-19 were to hit them. I therefore started working with a number of nonprofits, encouraging them to pivot to the future of work. And that meant thinking a lot about automating our systems, our workflows, our approvals, but also being able to work virtually. In other words, we could still be in the same office but operating from different buildings. When I was the head of the Southern Africa Trust, I had the opportunity to work with a number of smart individuals from across the world to help us think about the future and how we could design ourselves, our institutions, but more importantly, our structures to be able to be anti-fragile. And so at this moment that COVID-19 has hit a number of our countries and found them really not prepared to deal with the future and the demands of COVID-19, it's important for us to reflect on our institutional makeup, on our leadership styles, but also in terms of how we are going to survive post-COVID-19. I want to speak from the perspective of philanthropy, the work that we do at the center. There's no doubt that COVID-19 has brought the best out of us, but at the same time, it has also brought the worst out of a number of us. And we have seen this through the way in which some governments have responded in a military format in trying to enforce the lockdown. But more importantly, I think for me, having worked in the space of philanthropy for a number of years now, and having argued aggressively for an adoption of solidarity mechanisms in dealing with African problems, this is an opportune moment for all of us to reflect and think about what solidarity means. And we have seen this in the past. In the recent cyclones that hit Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Mozambique, we saw a lot of solidarity displayed by companies, by governments, but also by individuals. We saw this happening also when Ebola struck in West Africa, in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. The first people to respond to the pandemic were the locals. And increasingly, we saw a lot of international well-wishers coming on board. And I think we could go on and on identifying some of these pandemics and disasters that have taken place in the past, and how different communities have come together to demonstrate solidarity. There is something different about COVID-19, and it is that COVID-19 actually affected the elite, the rich, and the middle class more than it did in the beginning the communities that are vulnerable. It has only been recent, as a result of community transmissions, that communities are beginning to feel the impact of COVID-19. And the reason why I'm raising this is because we have seen the volumes of support that have come from different corners. The scope of solidarity, the scope of donations that have been put in place. I'm raising this because it says something about how we look at ourselves and how we respond to disasters. If a disaster is directly affecting my interest, we see a lot of movement towards solving that disaster. And this is what is happening with COVID-19. The volumes are high, the scope is big, and that's because everyone is affected by this pandemic. It's unlike the other disasters that I referred to. Those would have been specific in a specific community, geographic area, and potentially not even going to affect others who are wealthy and could afford healthcare, could afford safety measures. But this is different with COVID-19. And so there's no doubt in my mind that the collective solidarity that we are seeing is partly driven by the fact that we are all affected by it. It's not just affecting one community or the other. So philanthropy and corporates and governments have responded differently to this. And I want to raise some of the issues around that. Philanthropy has really been thrust into the center of responses in terms of how philanthropic institutions would deal with the COVID-19. And there are a number of types of philanthropies that I want to touch on. The first is foundations. Philanthropic foundations have responded in the best way that they know during this time. You would remember that most foundations already have existing partners that they support, and some of them have supported these partners over a long period of time. What COVID-19 has done is to force these foundations to think about reprioritizing their current budgets to COVID-19 and its effects. And that means taking away resources that were either already committed or were about to be committed to existing partners. The real question that faces philanthropic foundations now is whether or not they should stick with the current partners or they should expand their pool to including new partners that are working directly on COVID issues. So we've seen a number of responses from foundations. The first is, a number of foundations have decided to relax the conditions of their grants for their existing partners and ask them to deploy the resources the best way they see fit in response to COVID-19. And that means understanding that some of the activities that were planned may not happen now. And so they have to relax the conditions of the grant in terms of reporting, but also in terms of timelines. But we've also seen a step further from foundations. Some foundations giving a further 1-year grant in addition to what exists, so that the current partners can have room to redeploy the resources, especially to building systems and platforms that would help them pivot to the post-COVID-19 world. Others are looking at multi-year grants because they are not sure whether post-COVID-19 their strategies will still be the same. So to avoid an abrupt exit, some foundations are beginning to think about giving long-term grants to their partners so that they are able to pivot without pressure to the new world. But we've also seen a number of foundations reprioritizing, like I said, their grants towards COVID. And so the Open Society Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, the Hilton, and many others have actually dedicated massive amounts of money towards COVID, both in their home countries, but also in low-income countries. And I think we are going to see a lot of this going forward. This is what foundations have actually done in response to COVID, and they continue to contribute to different initiatives across the world to respond to the pandemic. But we also know that during this time, a lot of economic activities were affected. And that means the economic performance of some of the endowments and investments of some of these foundations are also affected. And this will lead to a conservative approach from the side of philanthropies. A lot of them are going to wait and see whether the economy will pick up before they can commit themselves to new projects and new partners. And this is rightly understandable given the condition that a lot of foundations find themselves in. But this time has also shown that no one entity is strong enough to respond to COVID on its own. And so we are seeing lots and lots of collaborations that have sprung between governments and philanthropies, governments and communities, governments and the private sector. In South Africa, where I'm based right now, we see a lot of movement from all these corners responding to COVID-19. The Solidarity Fund is an example where billions and billions have been given by high net worth individuals, by government officials, some of them taking part of their salaries and contributing to the Solidarity Fund. And this is true of many other countries across the world and in Africa. But we have also seen during this time the benevolence that high net worth individuals and general people on the street have given towards the cause. From Nigeria to Kenya to South Africa to Egypt, we see lots and lots of initiatives that are spearheaded by individuals, by high net worth individuals, but also by communities and by corporates. This is a really good time for us to see the potential that philanthropy could have in solving complex problems. And we know that at this point in time, there are specific areas that are of need. And these are areas around education. For example, how do we get all our education institutions to be prepared to offer online teaching and training? So a lot of support has to go into education, into putting in place systems and mechanisms so that education continues and is not affected by the pandemic. But there's also a related component, which is that of civic education. How do we get communities educated around public health issues, for example, because it's going to take communities to solve COVID-19 and not a militaristic approach as we have seen in other countries. How do we get our market spaces, our schools, our universities, our workspaces done in such a way that we are still able to curb the spread of COVID-19? The other area that I see that is going to require attention is obviously the area of health and healthcare. We have seen lots of attention towards this, especially by high net worth individuals, corporates, donating different kinds of equipment and medical supplies in order to curb COVID-19. But going forward, there's another area that will require attention of donors, philanthropy, and any other well-wishers, which is the fate of the essential workers, the fate of those that are affected by the shutdowns in different countries, workforce development. These are some of the areas that will be very important if donors are looking to support. There's the whole area around the environment. I think what COVID-19 has actually demonstrated is the need for a harmonious relationship between humanity and the environment. There's no doubt in my mind that going forward, we will need to pay more attention to the environment, and how we treat the environment is a measure of how our lives are going to be going forward. There's the issue of social services, of course, that I think will require attention as we go forward. So these are some of the areas that I think philanthropy should be seized with at the moment. I know that there's been a creation of different funds globally, different funds addressing different dimensions of the pandemic. But these funds, to be sustainable, will need to be strategically aligned to the post-COVID-19 world. I want to end by talking a bit about what I think corporates should be doing. A number of corporates already have embedded with them the corporate social investment strategies. At this point in time, a lot of what corporates might have planned to do may not be possible because of social distancing and other measures. But this is an opportunity to actually review the corporate social investment strategies and align them to the future of work, and take a lot of what the CSI strategies were addressing into account when thinking about whether it's workflow giving, whether it's workplace payroll, around the need to really make this strategic to the demands of the future. And I think that a lot of corporate budgets are also going to be squeezed as a result of this. And so the beneficiaries of corporate social investments are also going to decline. And this is a huge concern given the amount of work that still needs to be done when it comes to issues of addressing poverty, inequality, and others. And this really speaks directly to my last point, which is that we were beginning to see African high net worth individuals giving beyond their borders. But what COVID-19 has done is to force them to retreat to their local context and give locally. I think this is a short-term approach. In the long term, we would want our African high net worth individuals to think continentally, to think from a Pan-African point of view, and recognize that even if you solve problems locally and you don't solve problems of your neighbors, when that time comes for the borders to open, for people to start traveling, and so forth and so on, that's the time that we are going to have another round of the pandemic, because we would have focused only on ourselves and not focused on those around us. So the call perhaps that I'm making is for our high net worth individuals, for our governments, to actually think regionally, think continentally, and think globally in devising whatever measures they are putting in place in addressing the pandemic. COVID-19 it is now, but it's possible that we might have other forms of pandemics going forward. We should have lessons from this and use this to design strategies that are going to make it easier for us to make that transition to a new world, a new normal. And that's what COVID has given us at this point in time. I thank you.